Good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate you attending today. This is the fourth in our series of security chats with our vendors. In fact, this time we're actually interviewing Dan Powers, one of the folks that has been doing BigFix for years and years and years. And our topic today is how to patch remote users when you might not have access behind the firewall. So it is just the team of three, Dan, Phil, and Tammy. But I think what you'll really learn today is not only just how you can impact the remote users, but what a wonderful tool this is. And Dan's got some things that he'll share with us today to educate you a little bit more.
Well, we had an epiphany the other day, and someone said it to me, and I thought about it again this morning. It was, in 30 years, if you think about it, the country will be led and run by a bunch of kids that were home educated by alcoholics. Which is totally true.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So Dan, I kind of gave you that intro
Tammy.
there. Stop it. You keep throwing me off today. Let's talk about, as we have been throughout these chats, our remote users. And a big thing that's happening is we're getting a lot of inbound calls about managing patch. How do I patch? Just really, it's tough because if you think about our last few chats, everybody went home, not just in, over time. It was everybody went home. They took whatever they could, laptop, desktop, whatever they could home, but that was just to get them up and running. Now that it's been weeks, they're really getting concerned that those folks are not being patched properly, secure. We all know the phishing and et cetera, things that are happening. So why would somebody care about BigFix, and what would that mean to them in this kind of environment?
Well, there's a couple things there. So first, we did make a video of this, which we'll put up here on the board just so people can go look at it, which is in a little bit more detail, right? But at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. You went home with a bunch of these devices, right? And some of them, as you said, were not meant to go home. They were probably desktop machines. So from a patching scenario, most of the companies we work with did their patching, and especially with BigFix, right? We still have that 98 first pass remediation issue. The issue is, of course, when you take them home. And again, in some scenarios, they were relying on their VPN connection for these machines. Right now, BigFix works whether it's on the network or off the network, meaning whether it's VPN'd in or not. So great solution for those that had it. So they still had control of all those devices, even though they were not VPN'd in. But then some of the issues came down with pushing out the patches themselves. So in the case of Microsoft, a big update to the Windows 10. Now, as we know, Windows 10, some of these patches going from one version to the other, it's no different than sending the DVD to the machine. You're talking a 4 gig image here, right? It's like the old Netflix days of getting that in the email. Here's your DVD of Windows 10. So it's a lot of data to move. So of course, if they're doing that over the VPN, if they're forcing all this traffic to go through the company, they just can't handle it. So those are the calls we were getting. So there's a couple of cool things at BigFix that made it easier. For those devices that are outside now that are working at home, there's a simple command that you can say, hey, you take all your directions from me, but when you're going to download, if I know you're at your house and I have, 10 people or 1,000 people at home, I say, listen, go get the files instead of from the BigFix infrastructure, go get it directly from the vendor. Means now it's going to go out your cable modem and download it. It's not going to force everything through the company pipe. So again, each person at each house is going to download the file, not stress out my VPN or my internal connections. Still does the SHA value and all that stuff to make sure it's all good. But at the end of the day, you can now do patching in a matter of, minutes or hours versus days is what these folks were struggling with, or not getting it done at all.
Well, you mentioned VPN a couple times. Are you telling me that most patching has to go through VPN? Kind of explain that a little bit more.
Well, so it's a couple things. And again, if I grab your board here, make this a little bit simpler. First of all, a lot of other utilities. So again, and they're not bad, right? So a lot of utilities have some really good features to them, but most of them use multiple agents and use multiple ports. So again, most people on the line get that, right? Multiple ports you have to open. BigFix itself uses a single port for everything it does. 52311, done. It's very easy to deal with. I can open this up, deal with it from the firewall. So by design, BigFix was designed to update your endpoints. I don't care if you're in Active Directory. I don't care if you're in a domain. I don't care if you're in 1,000 different domains. It's just nothing matters. It doesn't matter if you're on your network or not, or you're 30,000 feet in the air on go internet. If you're on the internet, it's designed to work and work efficiently. So that's the hugest difference. So folks that moved all their system, again, you might have hundreds, if not thousands of users now working at home. You used to patch them with whatever tool you have
Right.
internally. You had a lot of open up ports and all this thing working. Those tools were not designed to work over the internet sitting at someone's house like this. So they lost control of them at the end of the day.
Okay, yeah, so that's a big deal because without BigFix, a lot of people are literally staying unpatched.
That is absolutely correct. And
Wow.
that's a lot of calls that we got out of this point.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a strategy, right? This could be a short-term thing, but as if you noticed, most people talking today, this will be the new norm, right? People realize, hey, we start working at home. It's kind of hard to unring that bell. So
Yep.
most companies will still have a bigger remote workforce when this is all over than they did before.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing that we should do a little shout out for HCL, who owns BigFix, is how accommodating they've been to our customers in need and have been able to get what licenses they need right now, sometimes even worrying about how it's going to be paid for later. Now, that's not always happening, but I think it's really cool that they've opened their doors to say, how do we help? And our customers have been able to take advantage of that. And of course, anybody who's listening, we can work with you to get you set up. So that's just some of, again, the reason we do these chats are for these vendors that are doing the right thing for our customers. We certainly not going to publish those that aren't. And this is just another really cool thing they've done. They've put a beautiful bundle together for those folks that are remote.
Yeah,
So Phil,
that's to really expound upon that a little bit. What Tammy was talking about is that HCL really has come up with a remote worker bundle. And Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because previously, I think what BigFix had was, for lack of a better term, certain modules with different capabilities, right? And so now they're putting together a particular license or entitlement specific for remote workers.
That's correct. So you're absolutely right. So BigFix came in patch, lifecycle, and compliancy at the end of the day. Patch being really inexpensive. And again, I'm not the technical sales guy here. So it's like $5 an endpoint, right? So incredibly inexpensive to run and manage your environment. You get the whole BigFix infrastructure with that. Lifecycle added a bunch of other tools like remote control, software distribution, asset management, all these other features and tools, and compliancy, of course, did all the compliancy that is not patch related, but it had patch in there, so you do both. But the work at home bundle was unique, and the reason why it's unique is twofold. Is also version 10 of BigFix came out. So why this is important, HCL has been doing the development of BigFix now for years. That acquisition, if you will, of BigFix over to HCL, so it's no longer IBM brand, was official at the middle of last year. This is their first major release of an update and taking the software to where they want to go, which they're going to include mobile and all those good things. But one of the features here was kind of what Microsoft would say is that modern desktop. BigFix calls it some other term, but it's the same idea. Those newer machines, Windows 10, Macintosh OS, those that also have that chip inside of it that can do over-the-air communication, just like your mobile device, can be managed now without even an agent, right? So it's a barcode scanner. It's like running a giant AirWatch, but you still have the ability to push BigFix to it. So with that came that whole modern desktop management portfolio inside of BigFix. So what they realize is this work at home, they said, wow, these people are struggling to get their devices enrolled, to actually, patch them and manage them because they lost control of them. Some of the other quick things they wanted, obviously, is that patch management. some software distribution, maybe, hey, I got to push the VPN update to you. I got to do this stuff to you, whatever. And the remote control, because these folks working at home were now calling the help desk more often. So they took the new feature, that that modern desktop experience, and then some of the features out of Lifecycle, and they rolled them into a Lifecycle Lite in a sense, but it's called the Work at Home Bundle. And to Tammy's point, they're doing it and letting people run with this for extended period of time, or flexible spending, trying to help out. And again, that's what we're highlighting here. But it was the key features, Phil, that you needed to work at home in the BigFix platform. And while to me, I always thought BigFix was easy, this new modern desktop experience is making it easier to run it as well.
Right. And you opened the door for, and you mentioned that BigFix now is a new version was just recently released, version 10. Can you give us a couple of highlights, of version 10? Not, we don't need to go into the minutia, but, just from a really high level, what are some of the big capabilities that were introduced with version 10?
Sure. So a couple of things. They were changing the underlying platform a little bit. So that's always kind of goes unnoticed. It's a lot of work, right? And nobody gets a pat on the back for that. But they're taking it into a different direction than what IBM was doing with it. Part of that on their roadmap is to add the whole mobile piece. So again, that was one thing. If I said at a BigFix, it would support 50 plus different operating systems, which no other tool does, and they all work kind of the same way. The one little gap it always seemed to have was the Androids and iOS. Right. So it wasn't that complete UEM tool. They're adding that in there. So they had to change some of the underlying pinnings to do that. So hopefully by the end of the year, they'll have that mobile side in there, and it'll be, every device you could think of, from an Arduino board all the way to your Android or iOS phone. But some of the other things that they added in there was they're really pushing to enhance the web UI. They're trying to get rid of that old console. Now, I've been using it for a while, so I like that old console, but they're really going into that modern web UI feeling. A couple other big features that they added was cloud. So that you could actually, if you're Azure or AWS, instead of having to put agents on all those devices, you could talk to the cloud over APIs and actually see your cloud environment and manage your cloud environment even without the BigFix agent. But then you could also push the BigFix agent to it via that cloud connector. That was pretty huge. So again,
I think that's it. It's huge. Yeah. And like you said, there was the architecture changes that the end users really don't see. They had to do that in this new version 10. And then that opened the way for them to do some things, around cloud. Now, speaking of cloud, a number of our customers and also new customers, new prospects are looking at managed patch, allowing Champion to basically manage their patch process and on an outsourced basis. And of course, that allows their patching teams, whether that's a server team or an endpoint team, to be able to be redeployed and work on the other 100 things that they've got on their plate, right? So so let's talk a little bit about managed patch and what a big advantage might be there, right?
Well, I think you kind of said it, right? First of all, why did we choose BigFix? Because it runs on every operating system there is,
exactly.
Right? So we, if you try to pick some of the other tools, we can only do Windows, we can only do Linux, we can only do Mac. BigFix was the logical choice because it ran on every system out there, and consistently worked across operating systems, and there was no difference of patching a bunch of Linux servers via patching Macs or Windows boxes. Didn't make a difference.
Yep.
So logical choice of a tool. The other reason why is because it's the only tool that does have that 95, 97 first pass remediation and that single port that we talked about before when I had the discussion with Tammy. So perfect logical tool to do with it. But you also hit the nail on the head is most organizations, not all, but most, don't really have a patching team. They have somebody who is their Windows admin, SQL admin, whatever, who happens to do patching, right? So it's almost an annoyance to these folks. And it's also a commodity if we start thinking about it now, right? Especially as we start trusting the cloud a little more in these things. It's like, hey, patching has to happen. And quite honestly, it's mundane work in a lot of sense, and it's thankless work, but it does have to happen. It does happen to go against your change board. And quite honestly, people don't want to do it. So we're finding more and more people want to do this from a managed scenario. And exactly to your point, hey, Phil, if you're the director and I'm meeting your SLAs and I'm keeping your systems patched and compliant, do you care which tool I use? Do you care if it's outsourced? As long as you get your report and go, yes, this is working, you're meeting my SLAs, you don't really care, do you?
Right, no, not at all. Yeah, and I think from a justification standpoint, we're finding quite a bit that we're able to justify managed patch, particularly many times much cheaper, and we can do it much more effectively and cheaper than they can with their own staff, right? So that's a big selling point.
Oh, it's huge. And again, I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right. It's just like cloud. Why is some of the reasons the cloud is cheaper in some senses? Well, because if I have the hardware and I have 100 customers, it's cheaper for me to do that instead of trying to build a server system for one. Same thing with patch. The managed patch guys are really good at it. This is their only job. They tend to do it better than just about anybody else who is a part-time job. So absolutely, it becomes cheaper, faster, and you get better results at the end of the day.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do is we bundle a number of additional services within our patch process, and I think that is a real differentiator, and we can go into those details for anyone that's basically interested in maybe considering us for a managed patch service, right? So, go ahead.
It's really been growing this last year, obviously. So yep.
Yeah. So from an overall perspective, are some of these customers having to make architectural changes as they are trying to patch remote workers within BigFix? Or did you say at the very beginning that, quite frankly, is we really are in a good place, and because of some of the new advances of being able to patch directly from the vendor, then we typically don't have to make architectural changes like relays and those kind of things?
Well, it depends a little bit. Everybody's going to be a little different, but the changes are minor. So I've had it on both sides, Phil. One customer where they just never really did. They had literally like 2% of their work staff go home, and they were always over VPN. So they actually didn't even set up that remote patching capability. So we assist them in there. Their biggest issue is the VPN. So we did that idea of saying, hey, go get the patches directly from the internet. It worked for them. Very minor changes at all. We had another company, however, that a bunch of their staff went remote. They were always set up to do remote patching, however, not to the scale that they now were doing it. And they had the same type of issue. And because they were already invested in the cloud, within an hour, we spun up a couple relays actually in their cloud environment and offloaded that patching workload and everything to the cloud, and they were quite happy with it. So it depends on how you're trying to do it, but to your point, the changes are minor. Either route you want to go, very flexible how you want to design it, and in both cases, we had it up and running in less than a day. So.
Hey, all good things that we've talked about so far, guys. I think one thing that Dan, you and I in particular have run into this a few times is we have a lot of ServiceNow customers too, and they are really into automation and moving as much as they can there. And I know a couple projects probably have stalled when they want to integrate something like a BigFix into ServiceNow. But, and this is a shameless plug, but there's something we have that could really help those folks. We have an app that integrates BigFix into ServiceNow, and it's not a 6-month project. In fact, it can be up and running in less than a week. And it's probably just worth sharing what value added has been to our ServiceNow customers.
Yeah, you're totally right, and it's totally a shameless plug, but it's your webinar, so you can do what you want. But I'll show an example since it's on your Blackboard. It's like we were ready for this, but it is true. So I've always said that from the security side, right? having a source of truth, knowing how things hooked up, who owns something, all this good stuff, even from a security perspective, what to me was always vital. But as companies go down this route, you have that CMDB, that configuration management database.
Yep.
It's, hey, what devices are coming off lease maybe? How do I plan my budget this year? Where's the cap spend in this? Incredibly important to have this. And as we know, for our customers who do have BigFix is that near real-time reporting of anything you want on your device from a software or hardware standpoint, right? We even do customized stuff, as we've even gotten the credit card readers on a bunch of POS, thousands and thousands of POS devices type thing. And we can pull that data into your ServiceNow. So if you have BigFix and you have ServiceNow, the eBridge connector was built explicitly to bridge that, to bring all that data and to keep your CMDB up to date and up to date daily. And then the flip side, because eBridge is bi-directional, the cars can flow the other way. You can do things from ServiceNow and take action on any device anywhere in the world in your BigFix environment, which includes, as Phil had just talked about, me and Phil, that whole patching scenario, right? Being able to go to the CAB process, figure out which patches need to be deployed, and have that automated out of ServiceNow's workflow. So you're bridging both tools, what they do best together, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, it was just obviously it's
a shameless plug.
It's a shameless plug, but it is also something that I think folks, when they realize what it does and how fast it can be implemented and at a lower cost than a lot of things out there, it actually is of value. So sorry for the shameless plug, everybody, but we do have quite a few customers that were thinking of canceling projects, and this was a way that they could get things done quicker. And again, continue to secure the remote workforce. Even things like the self-service in that application has been helpful to them as well. So I don't know if there's anything else, Dan, that you wanted to add today. You seemed like you've covered BigFix. It's very obvious you've been doing this for a long time, and I know as a company, we've really embraced it. But anything else you'd like to share before we wrap it up?
No, like I said, I think we covered a lot of things today. I think I'm excited that HCL is really taking this with the new version 10, and I think we'll see a lot of other good things. I'm very excited to see the mobile side of it come in BigFix this year. And at that point, you got a truly universal, unified endpoint management system that covers everything across the board. So I'm kind of excited for that.
Yeah, excellent. At this time, let's go ahead and talk about what's coming up next, which is the next one we have will be with Alert Logic. They're coming in talking about securing the cloud and monitoring across the entire enterprise. Another great partner of ours. And as you can see, we're scrolling all of them, so you can go to our website and register, or when you get this video, obviously you can use that to click on it. Excuse me, I should say the PowerPoint. When you get the PowerPoint, you can click on it. But we still have questions from folks, and I think they've been rolling in, so let's go ahead and take the questions, and then we'll wrap it up after we've answered all of those.
You didn't forget the questions this time. Awesome.
I know.
Yeah,
usually I have to say it at another time.
Yeah, we've got a few questions, Dan. So if you don't mind, I'll try to make this brief because I know we're running up on the time that we promised people. But there's one question about how does BigFix handle a multi-cloud environment, multi-cloud management from BigFix?
Okay, so you guys can hear me? I was having a problem with my mic. Okay, cool. So the new piece of it is that it has an API. So if folks that have run the lifecycle toolkit and actually have hooked into their EXI servers, and it allows you to pull all that information from the EXI server and do things like, snapshot a box, start a VM, image a VM. It's kind of that same idea. It now has hooks into AWS and Azure. And to be honest with you, I don't know if they have the Google or some of the other clouds, but AWS and Azure. So what that means is, you can go in with your credentials. Obviously, we got to get the credentials. And then BigFix can make those API calls to your cloud environment, or even if you have two different cloud environments, like I said, AWS and Azure, which I know exist, it will be able to pull that information into the BigFix console. And even the icon looks a little different. It shows it kind of like a cloud icon. So you know, oh, look, I can see this device, you know, whatever it is, a server in Azure, and it's going to have a little Azure cloud on it. If it's AWS, it'll have a little AWS cloud on it. So I at least get that inventory, and I can do certain things over that API. Now, to get full functionality, you do still want to, in a lot of cases, want to put the BigFix agent on it, but no longer do you have to deploy it the old way. I can then install the BigFix agent over that API, right from the console. Hey, go put the agent on it, and then that box will show up with the cloud icon and the BigFix little icon, and I'll be able to do other things that I can't do over the API, but the API connector's still there, so I can do things via the API that I can't do via the real BigFix agent. So that actually makes it really, really kind of nice.
Yeah, gives the administrators, you know, full visibility across clouds if they have got multiple clouds, as well as the on-prem, you know, environment, right?
Correct. And actually another good point to that was, because I've done this before where people had cloud environments and they would put the agent, or they'd be like, well, this is DevOps, the servers only exist for a short period of time, and they would struggle with, do we put an agent on it so at least we could do something to it if we had to, or at least have the knowledge that it was there, but they knew it was going to be short-term living? Now with that API piece, they don't have to make that decision anymore. It's just, it shows up, and if you delete it, remove it, it goes away. So that part's very cool, especially in the DevOps world.
Next and very, it says you stressed that we didn't need to have VPN access behind the firewall in order to patch. The question is, how does it find the endpoint if you're not connected to the network?
Okay, so just FYI, hopefully I am speaking well. Phil, you definitely broke up there. I know you're up in the mountains there. But if I think I heard you correctly, it was the question around how does the endpoint able to find the proper relay when he's on VPN or not on VPN, and when he comes back into the corporate office or he's working at home. So I'm pretty sure that was the gist of the question. So at the end of the day, everything's configurable. Now, what I like to do is make things as automated as possible. And part of that is to leverage something that BigFix calls relay affiliations. Basically, what that means is, you know, you might have 2 or 3 relays in your environment, or you may have hundreds of relays in your environment. All depends on the size. And I've been in environments where they've literally had hundreds and hundreds of relays. So it did become, you know, a little bit awkward, or, hey, how do we make sure an endpoint, when it comes online, is going to attach to the network in the most efficient way possible? So we leverage these relay affiliations, and usually based on like the subnets, which we could easily get from the network team, or if they had something like SolarWinds, it's like, hey, just export this data to us periodically and we'll keep it up to date. So in that scenario, I can easily detect, first of all, if you're inside the corporate network. Okay, you're inside the network. You know, my first choice of relays is obviously not going to be the DMZ. I don't want you to talk outside the network just to come back in. But then it might be, well, based on your subnet, I know you're in a branch office in Boca Raton versus an office maybe up in Boston. Awesome. Now I know my targeted set of relays is much, much smaller, right? So now at this point, that's how I deal with it. Now in that same aspect, if that user then goes home and he's on, you know, the home wireless network and he's connected over the internet, I could easily then detect, well, you're not in my corporate network. I need to route you through the DMZ relay, right? That's fairly simple to do. Now, when the user VPNs back in, right? We're going to detect that IP change. And in most companies, they're only going to have a very small subset or maybe even one subnet of the VPN. So again, very easy to identify, you know, hey, I just attached to 10.10. Whatever, 8.0 subnet. Yeah, this is the known VPN subnet. Okay, now I want you to attach to maybe a top level relay, because most likely all the VPN traffic at this point is now coming over a very predictable network route. I know where I should attach you. So that's kind of how it works. And I had a great example of this at one of the colleges, where, you know, they had a huge campuses, South Campus, North Campus, and even in another city. And we could actually even track a student. Hey, they're in the dorms, they're on South Campus. Hey, they're now in the science building on North Campus. And we could actually even see them moving around. So in a sense, that's how it works. There is a little bit of setup. We do obviously need to know a little bit about your network. We can't do it blind, but relay affiliations, when done properly, works very, very well.
Hey, Dan, one last question came in. I know we were talking modern desktop, et cetera, but I think what we meant is the actual name of the solution for remote users is the Modern Client Management Bundle. And I don't know if you have any more you wanted to say about that, but I want to make sure it was clarified for everybody what HCL does call that bundle is the Modern Client Management. So any other thoughts on that? If not, we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll just clarify that. So their modern desktop management is kind of separate from the work at home. The work at home is just that bundle name they gave to a couple products they put together. The modern desktop management is the idea of new devices, right? Windows 10 and Mac OS on new hardware that have kind of that over the air, that cellular connectivity. You could manage it like you would a mobile device, like a true mobile device, like my iOS iPhone. Don't necessarily need the agent. I literally will talk over the air. And again, just like the cloud, it'll show up like a managed device over the air. And then again, I could still push that BigFix client to it. Part of the difference is in the interface in the BigFix side, it will look like an AirWatch, a Moz 360, a mobile iron, where you could literally go through and select profiles for those that have ever been in one of those consoles, like, hey, turn off my screen, you know, tell me if you're jailbroken, all these different things. And it basically takes that information and pushes a policy via BigFix, which is then enforced.
Great webinar, guys. Appreciate it. Dan, as always, I learn something every time I listen to you on the topic of BigFix. So thanks, everyone. Hopefully you join us next week when we have Alert Logic in our chat. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you very much. Be good.